My Gavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I'm Arik here, Guard of Earth, and head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back to Divide and Conquer as we continue on with faction overviews, today dealing with the Kingdom of Rohan. So, the starting size for the Kingdom of Rohan is one of the bigger ones, to be honest. There's quite a few regions packed into this small space, from Edoras in the south to Onodrith, Entwade, Ginyard, Fulberg and Hornburg. To the north, freely claimable Rockburg and Tirith Anduin, and to the east, or Uldburg as well, sorry I forgot about that, and to the east you meet into Gondor there. But you'll note then that a sizable starting domain. Now the army that you start with is therefore relatively large as well in order to maintain garrisons. So each city has a couple of militia units normally, but the king and the capital has a little bit better. But generally speaking, it's sort of peasant scouts, peasants militia, things like that. There's the odd unit of strength dotted in and about the roster or the starting point, so that you can muster something of an army to help fend off the closing storm of Isengard. Coming storm. Turning to generals then, there are a few custom generals throughout the roster, but maybe not the ones that you were expecting. So in the north here we have Éomer and a number of Rohirrim and Rohirrim archers, but Éomer just has the standard Rohan bodyguard, as does King Theoden, who we will talk about more in just a moment as he is pinned in place, but he only has Rohan bodyguards as well, and that is because the Rohan bodyguard is a fantastic bodyguard unit, and it would be hellishly OP if Éomer or Theoden had any larger size cavalry bodyguard, as I've discussed at length in the time I've been on YouTube. Cavalry bodyguards are ridiculously overpowered, and we try and minimize that. But you will note that Theoden, being the king, has a larger starting bodyguard anyway, and Éomer also has a larger size as well. Now, oh no, wrong thing. We want the tree. Here we are. Theodred is still alive and is currently your faction heir, but he also just has the standard bodyguard as well. There he is, your faction heir. Now, one of the few custom ones is Erkenbrand in the Hornburg, who has Helmingus. I was going to say Jorlingus. Helmingus, your best archer unit. So he's a good archer general and very good at defending the Hornburg, which is his purpose. Similarly, Gamling, the governor of the Westfold, he has Riddermark Axeman to help him pack a little bit of a punch in the early tier. He isn't the governor of the Westfold, Erkenbrand is, and he rules from the Hornburg, but Gamling is actually in the Westfold. Or, well, I suppose it's Gap of Rohan there. I've just done myself out of information. It's the Gap of Rohan that he is in, with the Westfold ending there. But in truth, the Westfold actually encompasses this, and the Gap of Rohan is a geographical feature rather than a region. So those are the custom bodyguards that you get dotted throughout. You'll note that no one starts in the fort of Dun Harrow, but if you fight on that fort, it is actually the Dun Harrow battle map. It is not a standard fort, but you'll likely never fight there, so it's a bit of a waste, really. Family tree, as we've just discussed, Theoden has Theodred, and his nephew Éomer is alive as well, with Éowyn currently age 0, which is interesting. We have, bizarrely, it seems that when I haven't tinkered with Rohan very much at all since for years, basically. So there might be a few things, and that's one where Éowyn seems to be the age she should actually be, whereas Éomer, of course, is 16, so that you can play with him. Many people keep suggesting we do change the date and actually just move it to the start of the War of the Ring, because why not? And if I am honest, I'm kind of leaning toward that myself as well, because otherwise we keep having to explain away oddities like Éomer being alive at the moment when he should have only just been born, or possibly not even born yet, and just odd little things like that. And I think as well, people don't really know why 2980 is the start, but 2980 is the point that Saruman finally, it's either when he searches for the ring and they finally sort of declares himself as an enemy of the Free Peoples, or it's just that's the point that he searches for the ring. While still not being an enemy of the people yet, he is well and truly lost to the Free Peoples. Anyway, the victory conditions for Rohan are to hold 30 regions, to defeat Dunland, Mordor and Isengard. So you've got to take down the 3 evil nations around you, as you might expect. Turning to the area you're in then, of course you've got the White Mountains on your southern border, and there is no crossing point. So the only way across is over there at Cirith in Nauni Falge, or all the way across to the Pelennor Fields and crossing through the Pelennor itself. Otherwise, so you've got protection from the southern border, but of course all of your energy and effort will be turned on Isengard. But starting regions you can take, as we've already covered, are Rockburg and Tirith Anduin to the north. They are free for you to take. There's nothing to the east, where you will eventually border Mordor as they cross the river and take Calenhad. So you've got to watch out for that. But Isengard are coming at you straight away. Custom battle maps that you'll fight here. There's a plethora of battle maps in Rohan. The Hornburg is custom, Edoras is custom, the Dunharrow Fort is, Isengard is. That's plenty to be getting on with, giving you a lot of variety. Of course, if you make it to Gondor, all four of those settlements are custom as well. So there's a lot of variety in the early attacks on cities that you might get as Rohan, which is quite nice. Turning to the full neighbours, then, as we already discussed, Isengard and Dunland. You start at war with Dunland only, but not Isengard. Isengard have yet to declare themselves as an enemy of you, but they will do almost immediately. Now, you're at war with Dunland, who are allied to Isengard, so you can't actually ally Isengard without first making peace with Dunland, which is very difficult to do, because Isengard will likely attack you within the first few turns. Now, do note that on turn 1, they did actually get trade rights with me, with Grima, but that won't last. They will very swiftly attack you. Isengard will be the chief enemy for much of, if not all of your campaign, because at the point that Isengard fall, the campaign becomes very easy, as we'll deal with later. So outside of that diplomacy, you're allied to Gondor and the Principality of Dol Amroth. You're also allied to the realm of Lothlorien to the north, who in previous years actually helped your people when they first founded Rohan. Galadriel famously sent a mist to cover the charge of the Airaid as they charged down the Anduin behind Eorl the Younger, and founded the nation of Rohan at the behest of Cirion of Gondor. Is he Eorl the Younger, or am I thinking Brago the Younger? I can't remember. Eorl, anyway, was the founder of Rohan. And so you have relations with Lothlorien, and they're good. So turning to economy and whatnot, Rohan are a Northman nation. So you have the Northman culture. Now, if memory serves, of course, Dunland do not have that. Dunland are, in fact, middlemen, as many people have pointed out, because I foolishly claimed them as Melkor's shadow, but they're not. They are middlemen. But I believe the Breelanders are Northmen. No, they are middlemen as well. No, indeed. So the nearest Northmen to you will be Dale, Dorwinion, possibly the Anduin, actually, I think. Yes, the Anduin are Northmen as well. So those are the regions where you'd get your culture. So what that means is everyone around you, you're going to have to grow your culture. In terms of the buildings that you can build, you're not restricted in any way. You get the top tier castle, which is called a stronghold, and you get the top city, which is a large city. In terms of guilds, of course, you get the Horsebreeders Guild, and you're one of the few that gets the top tier of that, which enables training of 2 very good units. You're Airaid Lancers with 9 experience from that building, which is fantastic. And of course, it just speeds up the replenishment of all cavalry within the settlements you build them. Do note that there can only be 1 Jarl stables in the entire world, and so it's very rare that you'll ever actually get that building. But if you do, it gives you fantastic cavalry. You also get the Warriors Guild, which for you is the Pole Turner and Royal Pole Turners Guild. Because Rohan is very much a nation of spears, so the Pole Turner fits better than a generic blacksmith or swordsmith or something like that. But it has the same effect, melee weapon bonus, morale bonus to troops trained around the world. Otherwise, there aren't really any unique buildings for Rohan, I'm afraid. There's no specific economic buildings. I suppose in time and in future, if we wanted to, we could put in some sort of corral building or some sort of stable, economy-based stable building, but it's just not really necessary. You'll make money as Rohan, don't worry about that. Your diplomat comes from Edoras itself, from the Golden Hall of Meduseld, and there you'll see the diplomat, and it just gives a public order bonus. The next nearest location for the diplomat is Isengard itself and the Tower of Orthanc. Now, I believe you are a nation that get the Advanced Blacksmith, and the nearest location that you are likely to get it is in Gondorian territories. You might also get it in Isengard, but do note, as ever, do check the changelog that's linked in the description if you want to know where the Advanced Blacksmith can be built. So then we come to gameplay events and sort of scripts for Rohan. There's only really a couple. The first is that King Theoden in version 4.5 is under the effect of Saruman's madness, and he is locked in terms of movement for 10 turns. Now, this is a preliminary script that then has since been worked on, so in version 5 it'll be very different. But for version 4.5, it just simply means that you can't use Theoden for 10 turns. Now, he will be able to move 1 tile at a time owing to the way that roads work, which is very annoying. So you can move him 10 tiles away from Edoras, but there's no reason to. Instead, keep him in Edoras for now. Whilst he is locked, I believe it also negatively debuffs much of your nation. So the first 10 turns of your campaign, you need to be defensive, as your nation is a little worse than otherwise it would be. The other script for Rohan is, of course, the Glittering Caves, which pops up as a message on turn when you start the campaign, Caverns of Helm's Deep. All you need to do is reach out to the dwarves. You have to be on good relations with either Ered Luin or Erebor, and I believe you have to either ally one or the other of them, and then the script will play its part. It's a very minor script, so I've not bothered looking it up, because in general all it is you ally with one of the dwarves, or possibly both. No, you only have to ally with one of them, but you can't be at war with either of them. And then in time, a messenger will come and say, look, some dwarves want to come and visit the Glittering Caves. Will you let them in? You say yes. The script envelops and involves. And eventually it ends with the dwarves setting up an enclave in the caverns. And you then get to train a unique dwarven unit from the Hornburg, which unfortunately I don't think I can show you because it's script locked. So it doesn't get listed in this building here in the tab. So anyway, it's a very minor script, and it just leaves you at the end with a good dwarven infantry unit. Otherwise, though, that's about it for the scripts for Rohan. Now, we are developing further scripts in version 5 to change up Rohan's early gameplay and put a lot more emphasis on Theodred and Eomer, who are the two chief marshals of the Mark at this time in the Third Age, or indeed, actually, in 40 years. Eomer and Theodred are very much the defenders of Rohan, while Theoden succumbs to Saruman's power, which he channels through Grima, or rather Grima's sort of wicked tongue that keeps Theoden in check. And Theodred and Eomer therefore take the brunt of it. And in an attempt to jazz up Rohan's early game, we're going to edit them. But that's for version 5. For 4.5, Rohan is a very simple campaign, and all of your energy will be turned on Isengard. But as I say, once Isengard falls, the campaign gets much easier. Now, this is the point where I normally would give a difficulty rating, but I feel like it's disingenuous for me to give the difficulty ratings any longer because, as many people have pointed out, and as I myself am very aware, I have not played as enough nations to really actually rank the difficulty. So I would say that Rohan is a bit of an easier one, but I'm not going to give it a number, and we shall move on to the battle map. Welcome then to Rohan's battle map, and a quick overview shows you that you really are the ultimate cavalry faction. No other single nation has more cavalry options than Rohan, with the second of course being Canned, and then I think third is probably Dol Amroth, but I've never really thought about it to be honest. But you have a cavalry unit for all occasions, but you will note that you pay for this in having very few foot archers with only 2 options, one of which I believe is restricted. But starting us off are the Peasant Militia, Rohan's earliest tier unit, a simple spearman. They are pretty garbage, to be honest. 5 defense, 2 attack, 2 charge, only slightly better than the very worst goblins. Their purpose, as with all units at this tier, is really just to die. They will lock down enemy heavy elite units, they'll stand in the way. They'll stand attacking units so that you can shoot them with your archers, whilst knowing you'll kill some of your own, but if it's just militia you're killing, so be it. They are arrow fodder. Supporting them, though, the ice cream van is outside. Supporting them are the Peasant Scouts. You probably can't hear that, actually, because of the microphone. Ignore any of that. The next up is the Peasant Scouts. They have one purpose, really, and that is running down routing units and being very cheap in doing that. Their attack is only 3, their charge is only 4, and their defense is only 3. So they're really poor cavalry units, really poor. But you'll note they only cost 430, and their upkeep is probably around 150 to 200. Probably even closer to 100, to be honest. They're really, really rubbish, but they're really, really cheap. So it's good to have a couple of them just purely to run down any routing units at the end of the battle. That is their sole purpose. But then we get to the troops that will actually start doing something. The Eorling Spearmen and the Eorling Axemen. We'll start with the Spears. They're a much better version than the Militia. You should always get them where you can. Their attack is 3, charge of 2, so showing defensive stats. They won't kill anything, but they'll hold the line, with their defense of 12, compared to the Militia's only 5. So their attack-wise, they're not that much better. But defense-wise, they're substantially better. But you do pay for that, but them being a little more costly and having slightly higher upkeep. Supporting them are the Axemen. Now, the Axemen are not overwhelmingly powerful, but they do have that effective against armor trait. So with attack of 5 and AP, that's not too bad for such an early tier and cheaper unit. Their defense, though, is only 8, so do watch out for that. They will need to charge in and out of their enemy to really make up the most of their charge bonus and the most of their attack and armor piercing. Average morale response, no movement speed bonuses. Oh, I didn't check that on the peasants, did I? I think the scouts might be slightly faster. Yeah, movement speed, bizarrely, 22% faster. So they're very, very quick, thus reinforcing the idea that they are very much to chase down routing units. But at the main tier, or the first primary tier, the Eorling Archers come in as well, and they are your first and most common archer unit. Now, their melee attack is 5 and their defense is 7, so they're not too bad, actually, if the enemy does arrive at them. They have a missile of 3, which is good for an early tier archer. Average morale response, 18 missiles, 150 and low accuracy. That's where they are let down. So they have a relatively good damage stat for an early tier archer, but they're very inaccurate. and they don't have very many arrows. But now you can turn to an actual proper support from cavalry. There are 3 options here: Rohirrim Archers, Rohirrim, and Airaid Skirmishes. So Rohirrim are your standard cavalry: 5 attack, 5 charge, 10 defense. You charge them into the enemy, you run them away, you charge them in, you run them away, you charge them in. They're an early tier shock cavalry. There's nothing else really to say about them. Their secondary attack is 4, so not as good. Don't keep them in melee very long because a defense of 10 on a horse is not very good. Average morale response, but they're very fast. They're 120%. So they can make their way across the battlefield quite easily. Supported by an archer variant, the Rohirrim Archers have a melee of 4, a missile of 4, and a charge of 4 with a defense of 7. So terrible if they get stuck in melee. Don't get them in melee, but a cavalry unit with a missile attack of 4 this early on is very useful. 32 missiles, slightly lower range as all cavalry archers do, and an average accuracy. So they are actually considerably better archers than your foot archer unit, because you are a nation of cavalrymen. So unlike almost everyone else who has better foot archers, you have fantastic cavalry archers. Of course, your cavalry archers aren't as good as canned, because they are the cavalry archer nation, but you can give them a run for their money. You also then have Airaid Skirmishes. Now, Airaid Skirmishes are a javelin unit. So where the Rohirrim have a 5 attack and charge and a 10 defense, the Skirmishers have a 6 attack, a 5 charge, and a 12 defense. So slightly better attack and defense, but with the same charge. Coupled that with the fact that they throw a javelin, they are a superior alternative to the Rohirrim, but I do believe they actually come in later. Now remember that I've lined up all these units according to their stats, not according to their availability. So I do think the Airaid Skirmishers come in a little later, which is why they surpass the Rohirrim, because you have to wait longer to get them. They cost more than the Rohirrim as well. They can form a shooting circle when they throw their javelins, and they get a bonus against other cavalry, so they're a good anti-cavalry killer, and they're armor piercing with their javelins. Good morale, average morale response, 120% speed again. They really are just a buffed up version of Rohirrim, and they happen to throw a javelin as well. So do use them where you can. Then we come to the more elite tier that will start to really actually hold the line on the ground for you, and we will start with the Airaid Footman, because they are, again, another direct upgrade. This is your 3rd spear unit, your 3rd anti-cav, which you would expect. A nation that uses excellent cavalry would know absolutely how to deal with cavalry of their enemy. So with an attack of 5 and a defense of 17, they are really sound spearmen with a nice shield as well. A really good spear unit. Will easily hold the line while your cavalry perform the hammer attack. They can shield wall as well, which is a bonus to them. Good morale response, but no movement speed buff. They're just really good spearmen, but they are a little costly for their tier, 950. So their upkeep will be around 400, because helping you always to try and train cavalry. Supported by Airaid Swordmen then. They have an attack of 9 and a charge of 5. They have a total defense of 15, so they're a slightly more aggressive variant than the Footmen, when they have a lower defense but they have a higher attack, as you would expect. So they're just sword and board warriors. Sword and board can either hold the line, but they excel, really, their main purpose is to act as a sort of soft shock infantry. Try and flank with them, hit the enemy in the side or hit the enemy in the back. But speaking of shock, it's the Riddermark Axeman that you will turn to do that. And this is the Bodyguard of Gamling in Foldberg. Armor piercing, 7 attack, 6 charge, 14 defense. Now, they're not fantastic shock infantry, not by a long shot, but they are relatively good for what Rohan gets. For the options that you get, they are your best and indeed only shock infantry. But of course, you don't necessarily need shock infantry because you've got so much cavalry, so many cavalry options, I should say, that shock infantry is not something you're really going to be looking out for. But they do require a native province, so that basically your starting domain, they only come from those regions, the starting regions. And they're a bit costly as well, as all ground infantry for Rohan generally is. And your last ground archer is actually a very good one. They are the Minges, and they are the bodyguard of Erkenbrand of the Hornburg. A melee attack of 8 and a defense of 14 puts them very, very good in terms of stats. They're only slightly behind the Airaid Swordmen in raw melee attacks. But the Helmingas have a 5 missile, and that's, of course, what you will be using them for. They only come from Helm's Deep, though, and they have 24 missiles with 170 and average accuracy. They are nowhere near the best archers in the game. They are solidly average archers, but it is all relative. So for you, they are fantastic archers because they're the only one really that you get that actually does anything. A very, very good unit and a really handy one to have as a general at the start of the game. The cavalry at this tier then of course just gets better and better, but keeps with the sort of main theme we've seen throughout. So starting with the Airaid Lancers, they are the next tier of the standard shock cavalry. 7 attack, 11 charge, and an 18 defense. That's a fantastic charge bonus. They are excellent shock cavalry. Charge them in, run them out, charge them in, run them out. They will make short work of any enemy. A good defense stat for a horse as well, which means they'll survive. They're a really good cavalry unit. You definitely want to get Airaid Lancers, and it's the unit you should be looking out for until the Royal Guard are available. And of course, Royal Guard are very restricted, so Airaid Lancers are the core of your late game cavalry armies. Supporting them are Riders of the Fold, who are this one on the left here. They are cavalry archers, and they're basically mounted Minges in the same way that we saw with the Rohirrim archers and the Eorling archers. An 8 melee and 19 defense. Their charge is slightly lower though, so they're not as good on the charge, but they have a 6 missile attack. 130 on the range, highest accuracy of any of your units, and the most arrows of any of your units, but they only come from east or west fold, which is Ginyard and the town to its east or west. I can't remember where, but the 2 towns of your north. I think it's Onadrith is the east fold. I can't quite remember, but you'll find where they are in the game, no trouble. They're quite costly though, of course, but with that 19 defense, they will do very, very well on the attack or on the defense if they are getting shot at by the enemies. They can form a shooting circle, and they get a bonus against other cavalry, so they are good anti-cavalry cavalry archers as well. You also then get something that's a bit unique to Rohan. There aren't very many of these units around, and that is an armor-piercing mounted unit. So the Riddermark cavalry are, of course, Riddermark axemen on a horse, with an attack of 8 and a charge of 5, with a 20 total defense, which is fantastic. But what really stands them out is their armor-piercing attack. So they're kind of like assassin cavalry. You use them to hit the highest damaging or the highest armored enemies on the field, and they will make very short work of them with their high attack, armor-piercing, and that charge bonus on top. Their defense is high enough that they'll be able to pull out without taking too many losses. But they're not dedicated shock cavalry, so if you just keep cycle charging, it won't do that well. You do need to keep them in battle just for a little while to make use of their armor-piercing attack. But again, they only come from a native province, so they're restricted to Rohan. They have a movement speed of 110, so they are slightly faster than other cavalry, though. And lastly, the upgraded Javelin unit are the Shield Maidens of Rohan, who are indeed an all-female battalion, and they speak as such when you click on them, but of course I've got the sound off. They inspire your troops, they get a bonus against other cavalry, they can form the shooting circle with their javelins, they are effective against armor with their javelins, and they have a 12 javelin attack. Their secondary, though, melee attack of 9, a charge of 7, and a defense of 17. So when they finish with their javelins, they, unlike the situation we had before with the Arid Skirmishes and the Rohirrim, where the Skirmishes were just outright better, it isn't that way here. The Airaid Lancer is a better shock cavalry, but what separates the Shield Maidens is that they have a really good javelin attack, but their defense is lower, their attack is lower, their melee attack, is higher, but their charge is significantly lower. So they're not as good when they've run out with their javelins, but they are an alternative in a pinch to the Airaid Lancers if you can't get them, or if you've trained as many as you can. And lastly, the elite tier then, the main unit for you, of course, are the Medesailed Door Wards. They used to be called Dismounted Royal Guard, and they are elite spears. 8 attack, 4 charge, 28 total defense. Fantastic spear infantry. One of the best spear infantries, in fact, or indeed they're up there in the sort of top 10. They can do a shield wall, they get a bonus against mounts. They only come from Edoras though, and they are very restricted. And they don't get any other bonuses. The morale now is very good, morale response is good. You'll note that even with our elite unit, we don't have excellent morale. Rohan, whilst being a nation of warriors, are still Northmen, they're still humans. They're not superhumans in any way. They are warriors, yes, but they will still run away if the battle goes ill, even their elites. Supporting them, though, are the fantastic Guard of the Caves. Now, this unit, of course, is only available, as mentioned before, if you continue through the Dwarven Cave script and allow the Enclave to set up in the caverns. They are an axe thrower and then just a armor-piercing axe and shield. So a 10 melee attack, an 11 missile attack. The charge bonus is relatively low, but the defense is 25. So a really, really solid unit, a very, very useful unit for your roster. One of the only, in fact, I think it is the only, dismounted javelin-style unit that you actually have. They come only from the Hornburg. They have very good morale and good morale response. Their movement speed is slightly slower because they're dwarves. 50 meters, high accuracy, 2 missiles. Do note that the Glittering Cave script also gives you an extra tier of armor for your entire roster as well. So there's really no reason not to accept the Glittering Claves unless you are role-playing, because it gives you the Guard of the Caves, who are a fantastic infantry unit for Rohan, and it gives you an extra tier of armor for your entire roster. Literally every unit can be upgraded. I think bar the Medicel Dual Wards and the Royal Guard. I don't think those 2 units can upgrade any further in armor, but everything else can. So do complete the Glittering Caves, it's worth it. The Royal Guard are your last and most elite cavalry unit and are fantastic. Now, many people don't particularly like this barded horse style, but I absolutely love it, so I'm afraid you're going to have a job to change it. And I think it separates them from the otherwise horde of brown and white horses that Rohan seem to use, whereas you can then tell your elites apart because they have barded horses. They inspire your troops. They have a 10 attack with a 13 charge and a 28 total defense. They are fantastic cavalry units, and way up there are some of the best. They featured in the top 10 cavalry in the world, so Rohan really does have its crown as the cavalry nation. They're faster than other cavalry at this heavy armoured tier. Their secondary attack is 9, so only 1 worse. They get a bonus against other mounts as well, so they're a good anti-cavalry killer. They've just got it all going for them, but they are quite costly and they only come from Edoras, so they are quite rare. Now, your actual Bodyguard is just a watered-down version of them, so where the Royal Guard have 10, 13, 28, the Bodyguard has 9, 13, 28, so a slightly lower attack. And there are, of course, only 17 of them, but that will change depending on the general security stat. Their movement speed is 120, whereas I believe the Royal Guard was 115. So your Bodyguard's a bit faster, but it pays for that in a slightly lower attack. Secondary attack is the same as their primary, and again, bonuses against mounts. They are just a slightly altered version of the Royal Guard. And that is it. That is Rohan's roster. So hugely cavalry orientated. If you don't like cavalry, do not play as Rohan, because you just will not get on with them. Now, if you don't like cavalry and you do play as them, it might be an eye-opener, and you might think, oh, actually, you know what, I loved that. That was really fun. I'm going to play as Rohan again in the future. But they are entirely a cavalry nation. The infantry that we got, of course, a number of the infantry units they have are actually AOR restricted. So many of their infantry units aren't available all over the world anyway. So it's a very, very cavalry-orientated faction. And that concludes Rohan. So who do we think we're up against next week? Now, there are only 5 more of these episodes to go. So there are only 5 nations that have not been done. And there's nothing really to give away at the moment, apart from one unit that you can see in the distance there that's only in custom battle for 2 nations. So it probably is a bit of a giveaway. You'll note that there's a lot of green colouring on the siege crews, but otherwise it's quite a grey array before us. And of course you can now see that they are Ents, so it can only be one of 2 factions, and we've done the Woodland Realm, so it must be Lothlorien. The Yavan is chosen, marching forward with their halberds low. There's the Gurveleg moving in. The Gurveleg is such a fantastic unit. I wonder if we'll get to see them shoot. Nope, they're walking backwards and they're not going to shoot because their own troops have gotten in the way. The siege is dropping down. The AI can't use cavalry at all, so the AI... so Rohan suffers significantly as a cavalry faction. But it will be Lorien that we cover next week. But for Rohan, that is all. So thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. And until we speak again, Navair Naden Peramad Melonin, and farewell.